The Pillar of Dawn, Earth's only operational space elevator, stretched like a gossamer thread from the planet's surface to the heavens above. Its gleaming structure, a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance, connected the sprawling megacities below to Clark Station in geosynchronous orbit, 35,000 kilometers above the Earth's equator. As the elevator's descent module began its journey earthward, the hum of its advanced propulsion system reverberated through the steel walls. The sound, a steady mechanical rhythm, was both comforting and unsettling to the 5-person crew aboard. It was a reminder of the vast distance they had to travel and the thin line between the cold vacuum of space and the relative safety of Earth's atmosphere. Captain Conrad Fisher stood near the observation window, his weathered face reflected in the reinforced glass. His steel-grey eyes scanned the curvature of the Earth below, taking in the patchwork of scarred landscapes and sprawling urban centres that now dominated much of the planet's surface. The oceans, once a vibrant blue, had dulled over the decades, their colour muted by centuries of pollution and climate change. Yet, from this lofty vantage point, Earth still retained a haunting beauty that never failed to stir something deep within Fisher's chest. He had made this journey countless times, overseeing routine maintenance missions on Clark Station's vast solar arrays, but today felt different. There was a tension in the air, an unease that Fisher couldn't quite place. He flexed his fingers, feeling the familiar calluses earned from years of spacewalks and delicate repair work. Something was off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Behind him, the rest of the crew was scattered around the cabin, each lost in their own thoughts. Reyes, the first officer, sat hunched over a datapad, his dark eyes flicking across streams of information. Kowalski, a wiry technician with a perpetual nervous energy, fidgeted in his seat near the rear console. The remaining 2 crew members, Dr. Elena Petrova and engineer Yuki Tanaka, conversed quietly in the corner, their words barely audible over the elevator's constant hum. "How long until we reach the surface?" Kowalski asked, breaking the contemplative silence. His fingers drummed an erratic beat on the armrest of his chair, betraying his impatience. Fisher turned from the window, his expression neutral. 4 hours, he replied, his voice steady and reassuring. "Sit tight and enjoy the view. This is as close to peace and quiet as we'll get for a while." Reyes glanced up from his datapad, a wry smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're getting soft, Conrad," he quipped. "Next thing you know, you'll be talking about retirement and tending to hydroponics in some climate-controlled dome." "Not a chance," Fisher retorted, allowing himself a rare smile. The expression felt foreign on his face, like a mask that didn't quite fit. "There's nothing down there for me anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. As if in response to the captain's somber statement, the lights in the cabin flickered briefly, casting long, distorted shadows across the metallic walls. Fisher's brow furrowed, a flicker of concern crossing his features. He had felt something earlier, a strange vibration just beneath his feet, but none of the others seemed to have noticed. He dismissed it as a product of the elevator's complex mechanics and the stress of atmospheric re-entry. "Everything looks nominal," Reyes reported after a quick check of the systems. His fingers danced across the holographic display, bringing up diagnostics and readouts. "We'll be on solid ground soon enough." Fisher nodded, but the unease that had been gnawing at him since the start of their descent only intensified. He turned back to the window, watching as the curvature of the Earth slowly flattened, the planet's surface expanding to fill more of his field of view. The scarred continents below seemed to reach up toward them, like grasping fingers eager to reclaim the elevator and its occupants. As the first hour of their descent ticked by, Fisher found himself lost in thought, his mind wandering to the events that had led him to this point in his life. The years of training, the sacrifices made, the relationships left behind on a planet he now viewed more as a duty than a home. He thought of the family he had once had, now nothing more than fading memories and old photographs stored in the databanks of Clark Station. The space elevator had changed everything. It had made travel between Earth and orbit routine, opening up new possibilities for colonization and resource exploitation. But it had also widened the gap between those who lived planetside and those who called the stations and orbital habitats home. Fisher had chosen the latter, finding more comfort in the sterile corridors of space stations than in the chaotic, overcrowded cities below. A sudden tremor, almost imperceptible, pulled Fisher from his reverie. He steadied himself against the window frame, his senses on high alert. The vibration he had felt earlier was back, stronger now, a low rumble passing through the structure of the elevator. "Captain," Kowalski's voice cut through the ambient hum, sharp with concern. "I'm getting some odd readings from the nav system. We're accelerating." Fisher's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing as he strode toward the console. "That's not possible," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he could feel the change in their descent. Reyes was already pulling up additional diagnostics, his fingers flying over the controls. "He's right," the first officer confirmed, a note of disbelief in his voice. "The elevator's velocity is increasing, but we're still in automatic descent mode. We should be decelerating by now." "Override the system," Fisher ordered, his voice calm but firm. Years of training kicked in, pushing aside the growing sense of alarm. Kowalski's hands moved across the controls, his earlier nervousness now focused into intense concentration. "I'm trying," he reported, frustration evident in his tone. "The system's not responding. It's like it's locked out." Fisher moved swiftly to the communications panel, his fingers finding the familiar controls without conscious thought. "Clark Station, this is Captain Fisher of the Pillar of Dawn. We've got a malfunction, requesting immediate assistance." The only response was a burst of static, harsh and unyielding. Fisher repeated the call, adjusting frequencies, but the result was the same. Silence, broken only by the increasingly ominous hum of the elevator's systems. A sinking feeling began to settle in Fisher's gut, a cold weight that seemed to grow with each passing second. He had faced emergencies before, had dealt with equipment failures and the unpredictable dangers of space. But this was different. This felt intentional. "Reyes," Fisher said, turning to his first officer, "run a full diagnostic. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." Reyes nodded, his face a mask of concentration as he initiated the diagnostic protocols. The seconds stretched into minutes, the tension in the cabin growing palpable as they waited for results. "Nothing," Reyes finally muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's like the entire system is locked down. We're still accelerating, and I can't break us out of this descent pattern." Fisher's mind raced, considering and discarding possibilities. A catastrophic systems failure. Unlikely, given the redundancies built into the elevator's design. Sabotage. But who would have the means or motive to target a routine maintenance crew? The reasons didn't matter, not now. What mattered was that they were plummeting toward Earth's surface faster than they should be, with no way to stop or even slow their descent. "All right," Fisher said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Everyone, strap in. This is going to get rough." As the crew scrambled to secure themselves, Fisher took one last look out the observation window. The Earth below was no longer a distant sphere, but a rapidly approaching expanse of land and sea. He could make out individual continents now, the scars of human civilization etched across their surfaces. Whatever was happening, whatever force had taken control of their descent, Fisher knew that their lives now hung in the balance. The Pillar of Dawn, once a symbol of human achievement, had become a potential instrument of their destruction. The elevator continued its relentless plunge toward the Earth, carrying its crew into an uncertain and increasingly terrifying future. As the second hour of their uncontrolled descent began, the atmosphere inside the elevator's cabin had shifted dramatically. The initial shock and disbelief had given way to a tense, focused energy as the crew worked frantically to regain control of their situation. Captain Fisher moved between stations, his presence a steadying influence on the others. He checked readouts, conferred with Reyes on possible solutions, and kept a watchful eye on the rapidly changing view outside the observation window. The Earth was no longer a distant sphere. It had become an all-encompassing presence, filling their field of vision with a dizzying array of details. Continents rushed by, their features blurring into streaks of brown and green. Oceans glinted in the sunlight, their surfaces a deceptively calm contrast to the chaos unfolding within the elevator. "We're descending too deep," Reyes announced, his voice tight with barely contained alarm. He gestured to the display in front of him, where a cascade of numbers and warnings flashed in angry red. "We're well below the surface levels. This can't be right." Fisher leaned in, his eyes scanning the data. "How deep?" he asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Reyes shook his head, disbelief etched across his features. "Way beyond operational parameters," he replied. "According to these readings, we're heading toward the planet's mantle." "Impossible," Fisher muttered. But the data on the screens didn't lie. The elevator wasn't just malfunctioning, it was being directed, pulled by some unknown force deeper into the earth than any human had ever ventured. Kowalski's voice cut through the tense silence, high and strained. "Captain, we're still accelerating," he reported. "This thing's got a mind of its own." Fisher straightened, his mind racing to process this new, impossible reality. They were no longer dealing with a mechanical failure or even sabotage. This was something else entirely, something beyond their current understanding. "Stay calm," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his thoughts. "We'll figure this out." But even as he spoke the words, a part of him knew they had lost control of their fate. Whatever was guiding their descent had plans that went far beyond a simple malfunction. Dr. Petrova approached, her face pale but composed. "Captain," she said, her accent thickening with stress, "I've been monitoring our life support systems. They're holding steady, but..." "But what, Doctor?" Fisher prompted when she hesitated. "The external sensors," she continued. "They're showing temperatures and pressures that should be impossible at these depths. It's as if the laws of physics are bending around us." Fisher nodded, processing this new information. It aligned with the impossible readings they were getting from their navigation systems. Something was protecting them, shielding the elevator from the crushing pressures and extreme temperatures that should have destroyed them long ago. "Keep monitoring," he instructed. "Let me know immediately if anything changes." As Petrova returned to her station, Fisher caught Tanaka's eye. The engineer had been unusually quiet, her normally cheerful demeanor replaced by a focused intensity. "Tanaka," Fisher said, moving to her side. "Any theories on what could be causing this?" The engineer shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving the console in front of her. "Nothing in my experience explains this, Captain," she admitted. "The elevator's systems are functioning perfectly. It's the destination that's wrong. It's as if the anchor point at the Earth's surface has somehow moved deeper." Fisher felt a chill at her words. The implications were staggering. If the anchor point had moved, it meant that whatever was happening went far beyond a simple mechanical failure. It suggested a level of control and manipulation that was difficult to comprehend. A sudden lurch sent them all staggering. The lights flickered, plunging the cabin into momentary darkness before sputtering back to life. When Fisher regained his balance, he noticed a change in the quality of light coming through the observation window. Where before they had seen the blur of the Earth's surface rushing by, now there was only darkness. But it wasn't the darkness of space. This was something else. A deep, impenetrable blackness that seemed to press against the windows like a living thing. "We've entered the crust," Reyes announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're inside the Earth." The reality of their situation hit Fisher like a physical blow. They were traveling through solid rock at speeds that should have obliterated them. Yet here they were, alive and unharmed, descending ever deeper into the heart of the planet. The hum of the elevator had changed, taking on a deeper, more resonant quality. It vibrated through the floor, up through their bodies, setting their teeth on edge and making it difficult to think clearly. Fisher looked around at his crew, seeing the fear and confusion in their eyes. They were trained for space, for the known dangers of vacuum and radiation. This was something else entirely. They were entering a realm where their training, their technology, and their understanding of the universe no longer applied. As they plunged deeper into the Earth, leaving behind the world they knew, Fisher couldn't help but wonder what awaited them at the end of this journey, and more importantly, would they survive to see it? The darkness outside seemed to pulse as if alive, and Fisher had the unsettling feeling that something out there was watching them, waiting for them to arrive. The elevator screamed through the depths of the Earth, its descent now a hellish parody of its designed purpose. The lights in the cabin flickered constantly, plunging the crew into periods of complete darkness before returning with an eerie, dim glow that did little to dispel the growing sense of dread. Captain Fisher stood at the center of the cabin, a fixed point in the chaos surrounding them. His mind raced, trying to reconcile what he knew of the world with what they were experiencing. They should have been incinerated by now, crushed by the immense pressures of the Earth's interior. Yet here they were, still alive, still descending. The vibration beneath their feet had become a near constant tremor, as if something vast and powerful was moving below them, reshaping the very substance of the planet to allow their passage. Fisher could sense the fear creeping into his crew, though none of them dared to speak it aloud. Reyes broke the tense silence, his voice barely audible over the thrumming of the elevator. "We should have been cooked by now," he muttered, eyes fixed on the readings scrolling across his screen. "The heat from the mantle alone should be incinerating us, but the temperature's holding steady. It's as if we're in some kind of protective bubble." "That's not possible," Kowalski whispered from his station, his earlier nervous energy now transformed into a kind of numb disbelief. "None of this is possible." Fisher was about to respond when the cabin lurched violently, throwing them all against the walls. Kowalski let out a curse, bracing himself as the floor beneath them groaned and twisted. The metal walls creaked ominously, stressed beyond their design limits by forces they were never meant to endure. "Captain, we've lost gravity stabilization," Reyes shouted, clinging to his console as the world around them seemed to tilt and spin. The elevator continued to descend, faster now, as if being pulled into the planet's core by an unseen force. Fisher gritted his teeth, pulling himself hand over hand back to the main console. The familiar controls now seemed alien under his fingers, unresponsive to his commands. "We need to," he began, but his words were cut short as the lights cut out, plunging them into complete darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their ragged breathing and the ominous groaning of the elevator's structure. Then, slowly, emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the cabin in a dim, reddish glow. In that hellish illumination, Fisher saw the fear etched on the faces of his crew. Dr. Petrova huddled in a corner, her lips moving in what might have been prayer. Tanaka gripped her console, knuckles white, her usually calm demeanor shattered by the impossibility of their situation. Reyes and Kowalski looked to Fisher, their eyes pleading for guidance, for some explanation that would make sense of what was happening. Fisher took a deep breath, steadying himself against the console. The situation was beyond anything he had ever trained for, but he knew his crew needed him to remain calm, to be the anchor in this storm of impossibilities. "Status report," he commanded, his voice cutting through the oppressive hum that filled the cabin. Reyes was the first to respond, his fingers flying over his console despite the intermittent power fluctuations. "We're still descending, Captain. Current depth. It doesn't make sense. According to these readings, we're approaching the outer core." "That's impossible," Dr. Petrova interjected, her scientific mind rebelling against the data. "The pressure at this depth should have crushed us instantly. The heat alone—" "I know." Fisher cut her off, his tone gentle but firm. "But we need to deal with what is, not what should be. Tanaka, how are our systems holding up?" The engineer shook her head, bewilderment clear in her eyes. "Everything is operational, Captain. It's as if we're protected by some kind of, I don't know, a bubble or field. Our instruments are registering the extreme conditions outside, but none of it is affecting us directly." Fisher nodded, processing this information. Whatever force had taken control of their descent seemed intent on keeping them alive, at least for now. The question was, why? Suddenly, Kowalski let out a strangled gasp. "Captain, look!" All eyes turned to the observation window. The impenetrable darkness that had surrounded them for the past hour was changing. Streaks of molten red and gold swirled in the blackness, like veins of fire in obsidian. The sight was both terrifying and mesmerizing. "We've reached the outer core," Reyes whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror in equal measure. As they watched, the streams of molten metal began to coalesce, forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate. It was as if the very substance of the Earth's core was trying to communicate with them. "Is anyone else seeing this?" Petrova asked, her scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her eyes. Fisher was about to respond when a new sensation swept through the cabin. It was more than just the ever-present vibration they had grown accustomed to. This was a pressure, not physical, but mental, pressing against their minds like an invisible force. Kowalski was the first to react. He clutched his head, eyes wide with panic. Something's in my head," he cried out. Before anyone could move to help him, Kowalski stumbled backward, closer to the rear hatch of the elevator. And then, in a moment that would haunt Fisher for the rest of his life, something moved in the shadows behind the technician. It was fast, almost too fast for the human eye to track. One moment Kowalski was there, terror etched on his face, and the next he was gone, dragged into the darkness beyond the faint circle of emergency lighting. "Kowalski!" Reyes shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "Where the hell is he?" Fisher was already moving, his flashlight in hand. He swept the beam across the rear of the cabin, searching for any sign of their missing crew member. But there was nothing. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just an empty space where Kowalski had stood moments before. "What just happened?" Tanaka asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "People don't just disappear." But Fisher knew they were long past the realm of normal explanations. Whatever had taken Kowalski was not of their world. It moved with a speed and purpose that defied human understanding. "Everyone, stay close," Fisher ordered, his voice cold and controlled despite the fear churning in his gut. "Whatever's down here with us, it's not alone. And it's not friendly." The remaining crew huddled together in the center of the cabin, backs to each other, eyes straining against the shadows. The oppressive weight of the earth above them seemed to press down, a constant reminder of how far they were from the surface, from safety. "Captain," Reyes said, his voice low and urgent, "what do we do now?" Fisher's mind raced, weighing their options. They had no way to stop their descent, no way to communicate with the surface. They were at the mercy of whatever force had brought them here, and now that force was picking them off one by one. "We stay alert," he finally said. "We watch each other's backs, and we try to figure out what the hell is going on down here." As if in response to his words, the elevator groaned again, its structure creaking under unseen pressures. Fisher glanced at the control panel. It was still locked, unresponsive to any commands. There was no stopping this descent, no reversing it. "Look!" Petrova gasped, pointing at the observation window. The swirling patterns of molten metal had changed again. Now they formed distinct shapes, almost like writing. Symbols flowed across the window, alien and yet somehow familiar, as if they were tapping into some primal part of the human mind. "Can anyone make sense of this?" Fisher asked, his eyes locked on the flowing script. Petrova shook her head. "It's not like any language I've ever seen, but I feel like I should understand it. It's right there, on the tip of my mind." As they watched, transfixed by the alien communication, the pressure in their heads intensified. Fisher felt as if his thoughts were being sifted through, examined by some vast, incomprehensible intelligence. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the mental intrusion ceased. The symbols on the window faded, leaving behind only the swirling chaos of the Earth's outer core. Did anyone else feel that?" Tanaka asked, her voice shaky. Fisher nodded grimly. "They were looking for something, searching our minds." "Who? What are they?" Reyes demanded, frustration and fear evident in his tone. "I don't know," Fisher admitted, "but I think we're about to find out." The elevator's descent began to slow, the constant vibration changing pitch. After hours of uncontrolled plummet, they were finally approaching their destination. "We're stabilizing," Reyes reported, checking his instruments. "Whatever's controlling our descent, it's bringing us in for a landing." Fisher's hand tightened on his flashlight. "All right, people. We don't know what's waiting for us out there. Stay close, stay alert, and for God's sake, don't touch anything without my say-so." As the elevator came to a final gentle stop, an eerie silence fell over the cabin. The constant hum that had been their companion for hours faded away, leaving behind a stillness that was almost more unnerving. With a soft hiss, the elevator doors began to open, revealing a sight that defied all explanation. They had reached the core of the Earth, but it was nothing like what they had expected. Instead of a churning ball of molten iron, they found themselves looking out at a vast, alien landscape. Structures of impossible geometry rose in the distance, pulsing with an inner light that hurt the eyes to look at directly. The ground beneath their feet was solid, yet it seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. And there, at the center of it all, stood a massive, shimmering portal. It was a tear in the very fabric of reality, swirling with colors and energies that no human had ever witnessed before. It was a gateway, Fisher realized with a start. A bridge to somewhere else. As they stepped out of the elevator, still reeling from the impossible vista before them, movement caught Fisher's eye. From the shadows cast by the alien structures, figures began to emerge. They were tall, humanoid in basic shape, but wrong in every detail. Their limbs were too long, too fluid in their movements. Their skin glistened with a dark, oily substance that seemed to absorb light. But it was their eyes that truly chilled Fisher to his core. They glowed with an inner fire, filled with an intelligence that was utterly alien and undeniably malevolent. As the creatures approached, Fisher and his remaining crew backed up against the elevator. They were trapped, caught between the mysterious beings and the endless drop back to the surface. One of the creatures stepped forward, its movements unnaturally smooth. When it spoke, the words bypassed their ears entirely, resonating directly in their minds. "You are the reason we are here," it said, its mental voice filled with centuries of anger and resentment. "Trapped by your kind. Now, the time has come for retribution." Fisher's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. This place, this impossible realm at the center of the Earth, was no natural formation. It was a prison, built long ago to contain these beings. And humanity, in its relentless drive to explore and expand, had unknowingly constructed the key to their release. The space elevator, reaching from the Earth's surface to the stars above, had created a direct conduit to this ancient prison. And now, the captives were eager to reclaim their freedom. As the alien beings closed in, Fisher realized with grim certainty that their journey had never been about routine maintenance or scientific discovery. They had been lured here, manipulated from the very beginning to serve as the unwitting harbingers of Earth's doom. The portal pulsed, its energies reaching out like tendrils of light, and as the alien creatures began to move toward it, Fisher knew that the real battle for Earth's future was only just beginning.